Hello, welcome to Eldridge and Company. I'm Ronnie Eldridge. This is a special edition of Eldridge and Company. Today and over the next several weeks, my colleague Doug Muzzio and I will be joined by the candidates for governor of New York State. Some will air on City Talk, some will air on this program. Our website, CUNY.tv, will list the guests and the dates. Today we're joined by a Republican gubernatorial candidate, William Weld. Although Mr. Weld is best known as a former governor of Massachusetts, he was born in New York and actually has lived here for quite a while. Welcome.
Thank you, Ronnie. Good to be here.
Thank you. You have a long list of achievements. You were governor of Massachusetts, but before that, you were in the Justice Department in Washington, U.S. Attorney. Have you always loved politics?
You know, I grew up in Smithtown, Long Island, out in Suffolk County, and my father, the late David Weld, was the Republican leader, behind-the-scenes guy of the township of Smithtown, and really all of Suffolk County. I can remember Perry Duryea, who later became Speaker of the Assembly, coming to our house as a very young man, holding his hat in his hand, saying, "Mr. Weld, would it be all right if I run for the Assembly, even though I'm only a poor lobsterman?" So I guess I learned about New York Republican politics at my father's knee.
So, but it hasn't always worked out the same way it worked out with people who came to your father.
Listen, this thing, this thing went underground for 25 years. I thought I was going to be a Latin teacher, and then it sprang back with a vengeance after Ronald Reagan gave me my break to become a prosecutor. I got some name recognition, and then lucked into being elected governor on my first try there.
Well, not lucked. I mean, those were two fairly big upsets, both in the primary and in the general election.
Well, you got to be lucky to have two upsets in a row. Yeah, no, I was left for dead on the beach there. Right. I was 36 points behind with 2 months to go in the Republican primary, and I won it by 20 points.
I know, going away. It was really remarkable. And then you had the second win, then you had the Kerry race, and then the Mexico ambassador fiasco.
Right.
Yeah. What made you, after, you're a pro, why run for governor of New York? Why? What got into you?
Well, it's nothing new that got into me. I mean, I think it's great to be bound up with, entwined in the life of the place where you live, and this is my native state. I didn't move to Massachusetts till my mid-late 20s, and I grew up in Long Island and upstate in the Adirondacks.
Yeah, we're still not sure about you yet.
You didn't campaign in Massachusetts as being a New Yorker, though, right?
No. But if I ever was a carpetbagger, it was not in New York State.
Oh, okay. We're not accusing you of being a carpet. Right. What made you decide? What triggered Bill Weld to run this race?
Did the Republicans come to you, or did you go to them?
This stuff has to be self-generated. It has to be from within. I mean, there's a lot of self-selection in this business, and there has to be. You have to really want it. And I can see what needs to be done in this state, and I really want to do it. And it's thrilling. Not noblesse oblige, but personally thrilling to be able to make a big difference in the lives of a lot of people by decisions that you make all day long. And if you're an executive, and I think I have much more of the executive than the legislative temperament, it's great to go in and make decisions all day long. That's if your day is well organized. If it's badly organized, you spend all day chasing 3 personnel matters. But when it works, when you can devote yourself to cutting costs, keeping spending and borrowing in control, cutting taxes, working on projects that are going to help people, it's really exhilarating.
Okay. Times on May 17th, big headline in the Metro section, challenge to Weld in governor's race stirs a battle for the Republican soul. Is that an apt characterization of the race? And what is the Republican soul? What does it mean?
I mean, I can tell you what my political profile is.
Talk to me.
Some people like it, some people don't like it. But I'm more or less an anti-government guy. In the fiscal area of spending, that means hold down spending, and above all, hold down taxes. And I did that 19 times in a row, 19 tax cuts in Massachusetts, no tax increases. I think that's very good for the business community and employment, and that's why I do it. And we had the highest unemployment rate in the country in Massachusetts when I took over, and after 3 years, it was the lowest of the industrial states.
Talk about New York. How do you deal with summarize the New York economic problems and what a Bill Weld administration would do that might differ from a Spitzer or a Faso or a Pataki.
The New York economic problem is it's the most highly taxed state in the country, if you include county and local taxes. It's spending way too much, and its cost of doing business are out of control. And
that-
they're all set in Albany and foisted off on the rest of the state.
But everybody says that, right? I mean, that's,
Well, that's
maybe not
true.
the Democrats, but certainly Faso, your opponent in the Republican primary, says the same thing. He wants to cut taxes, cut down expenses, et cetera.
How do you do it? Give us some practicality. How do you cut
I've
taxes?
already done it. I've done it in a state that was
Do
three
it
to one
here.
Democrat against me.
What would you cut here? How do you do it practically here?
As a practical matter, you say in the workers' compensation area, you say we have to have a time limit on permanent partial disability payments. We have to have loss of use be causally connected to time off of the job, and then we can raise the workers' comp payments from $400 to $500, and we can cut the premiums the employers have to pay. In the utility area, we got to restore Article 10, the siting process for power plants. We can't ignore the supply side of the equation. I agree we should work on the demand side too, but we have to have the same type of emphasis on renewables that Governor Pataki has been spearheading, and a greater emphasis on siting under Article 10. In healthcare, probably the lowest hanging fruit of all. I mean, I cut the healthcare expenditures in Massachusetts dramatically by right-sizing the number of institutions. I see Mr. Spitzer said yesterday that he's not going to follow the recommendations of the Berger Commission, which is supposed to recommend hospitals for consolidation. Well, we have to do that. We can't continue to have unlimited excess capacity in the system at the most intrusive and expensive level of care imaginable. The New York healthcare system really seems to have been designed by somebody who wanted it to be as expensive as possible with no thought to management or cost.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say I don't think it was designed, but
It wasn't designed. That's the problem.
I've gotten very cynical about politics, and I'm not a candidate. So I listen to candidates, and they say basically the same things. Do you think people really vote for a candidate on their platform?
I don't know. I think style and personality is important to me as a voter. I think, is this guy trying to put something past me? Yeah. But, the one thing that I will say to voters in this race is you don't entirely have to take my word for it, because, I had the experience of becoming governor of the then most highly taxed state in the country, and the Massachusetts property tax went from number 1 to number 32. Out of 50 states.
How many people live in Massachusetts compared to the people in New York?
6 million in Massachusetts, 19.5 in New York.
So it's a major difference, isn't it?
It's
they're really not
economically,
comparable.
New York is 5 times as big by most measurements.
And with a concentration, more of a concentration of labor. No?
No. Massachusetts is one of only 4 states where the largest city is also the capital. I mean, it's dominated by Boston more even than New York is dominated by New York City. The upstate vote, meaning north and west of Rockland and Westchester counties, is 46.5% of the vote in New York State. Massachusetts has nothing comparable.
Right. No, I agree with that, because it's not the same size either.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
Back to Seoul here. What is the Republican Party? What ought it represent to New Yorkers?
I think it should represent a view that government is best which governs least. And, we want to do everything we can to get the economy humming, but we're going to get out of the way when it's appropriate.
Is that the reality, the actuality of the Republican Party today? What is the Republican Party?
It's certainly what I would do.
Okay.
I cut taxes, I cut regulations, and the economy did hum as a result. We created so many jobs, the unemployment rate went from 9.8% to 3.8% in 3 years.
But
and people appreciated it.
Okay. Does President Bush represent the Republican Party?
Well, he and I are quite different on some issues, but I give him credit for an issue like immigration. I think he's trying to do the right thing, and other elements of the Republican Party in Congress are the ones dragging their heels. One reason I was pleased to support Bush early in the primaries is I was present at a meeting down in Texas where he was invited by a bunch of Midwesterners who were down there to wink at them and say he didn't really believe in the No Child Left Behind Act, and his motivation was not to lift up all the children. He wouldn't go for it, not for a second. He said, no, we're not going to have the bigotry of low expectations. So in an area like education, immigration, I give the guy credit.
Where do you disagree? And more than your personal disagreement with the president, how much do you believe national issues will play in the governor's race, and how much ought they play in the governor's race?
I don't think a great deal. I mean, if I'm the candidate, I've always run as kind of the uncola. Obviously don't present as a white bread Republican, so-called. And I've generally run my own races. I think particularly where it's a state race and not a federal race, they won't have a huge impact won't have much of an impact in the governor's race. I mean, an issue like immigration cuts across national and state races.
If you were asked and it wasn't nationalized, would you send troops down to the border in the National Guard?
Would I send troops?
Well,
No,
National Guard people to the our National Guard.
I don't think so. I mean, the National Guard, you can dress that up so it isn't troops. It's not a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Right.
But on immigration, I'm one of those who thinks it's important that there be un camino hacia ciudadanía, a path to citizenship. So I'd be firmly on the McCain side of that issue.
In New York, we're used to, I mean, people of a certain age, when you think of a liberal wing of the Republican Party, which we really haven't seen that much of recently, think of a Rockefeller-type Republican Party. Is that what you represent, or are you?
I don't think so, because I cut my teeth as an economic conservative. I'm a supply-sider, and I believe in tax cuts to promote the economy, and I cut spending in absolute dollars when I got there. I cut 10% of the state workforce my first year. I mean, I remember the rocky years here, and Stanley Steingut was there, and those buildings were going up in Albany, and it was Katie bar the door. And even the Lindsay years in New York City, the latter years, there was very little sense of restraint on spending, and we've learned, beginning with the crisis in New York City in 1975.
Yeah, I mean, it was in the 60s.
Okay, but it's different politics. That's why.
Yeah, but I mean, the soul of the Republican Party, to go back, you're quite liberal socially.
Yes.
And very different from John Faso.
And
in fact, that is the major difference between you two.
Well,
in terms
and maybe partly life experience also. I mean, I have a very internationalist outlook. That's one way I differ from the Republican Party in Washington, and I've spent a lot of time going around the world when I was in office, both in the Justice Department. I was head of the criminal division in Washington, so I had responsibility for counterterrorism, espionage, narcotics internationally. I spent a good deal of time in Israel, both when I was in the Justice Department and when I was governor. I almost created an international incident in 1992 by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel on the occasion of opening a trade office there.
Would be quite
the elder Bush was not all that amused.
We would think not.
All right, so then how can you, I mean, it's very difficult, and I think we all have trouble with the characterization of both parties. I mean, I think both parties are searching for a common definition. They're both splintered, it seems to me.
Well, when I was in Washington in the Reagan administration, it was very clear to everyone at the table that the coalition that propelled Ronald Reagan to the presidency was part social conservatives and part libertarians. And I never made any bones about the fact that I came from the libertarian side of that coalition. And that coalition is no more, and the social conservatives seem to have captured a lot of the machinery of the National Party, and that's stuff that happens.
You're supported by the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
How many voters do they have?
That's not an accident. I don't know, but I'm pleased to have their support.
He wants their support. He's thankful.
So why do you think the Conservative Party is not supporting you? Is it because of your social position issues?
I do believe it's abortion and gay rights. Yeah.
Right.
That's my sense talking to Mike Long.
So what are your positions?
On
women's reproductive.
I'm pro-choice on the question of abortion. I think it's for a woman and her doctor. I don't mind a requirement of parental notification. We had it in Massachusetts. They have it most places. So that would actually be a step to the right, so-called, in New York. But it's fine with me.
Medicaid reimbursement for abortion?
I don't think you can distinguish between rich women and poor women where something as fundamental as the right to make reproductive health decisions is involved. On gay rights, I was well known, even famous, for having several open gays in my cabinet, and pioneered executive orders in favor of domestic partners' benefits. I think that gay marriage is a bridge too far for New York, given the polity of the state at this time. But I'd be for civil unions, and I'm very strongly for equality of opportunity for everybody, regardless of sexual orientation. And the residue from those positions is just not consistent with Mike Long's view of the world.
we should certainly say so.
And what about, can we just talk a little bit about international, because that's an interesting question. Although you're running for governor, it's still interesting to people. For strength in the United Nations instead of fighting it all the time, or what?
Oh yeah, no, I believe in a strong United Nations. I think that's in the interest of the United States. It doesn't mean you have to cede your sovereignty, but we should be trying to make use of this organization. And I know Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan is not a wild-eyed guy by any means. I mean, he came into office viewed as an ally aligned with the United States.
And what about Iraq? And then I'm finished. You can do that.
Okay.
Well, that's a tough one. I mean, we're there now. I think a unilateral withdrawal right now would send a real bad message. So I think we just have to try as hard as we can to get disengaged there on whatever timetable it is. But I don't think you should telegraph your punch on that issue.
Let's talk about the state of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is starting to look like the Democratic Party here. Everybody's shooting at one another.
Well, maybe we'll start winning and winning and winning then. That's great.
Is that the reason for it? I mean, you've got Al D'Amato after you. You've got Minaric in your corner. You've got Joe Bruno saying we need a primary. What's going on? I mean, well, you came from a state where the disadvantage for Republicans was worse, but it's deteriorating here. Talk about the party.
I don't think it's so bad to have different points of view within a party, even to have points of view shooting at each other. I mean, it's one big, happy, squabbling family, like the successful Democrats in Massachusetts.
He doesn't understand Republicans in New York. This is the People's Republic of New York. We don't brook opposition here.
Well, I never would have gotten elected governor of Massachusetts if I hadn't had a primary. And right now, politically, if you pardon a political observation, you've got Eliot Spitzer sitting there with all the name recognition in the world based on 7 years of press releases. And if the if the Republicans don't kick up a little dirt and make a little noise, they're not going to be in a great position come September. And, my style would be to play straight baseball, but to play some hard baseball. And if we have a primary that generates some attention, that's probably a good thing for the Republicans.
Did you think you were going to have a primary like this?
Yeah. If you told me a year ago that I was going to be anywhere near parity or equality going into the convention, I would have said you were dreaming. I mean, the last convention I had, I lost it 80-20 or 78-22. I barely made it onto the ballot.
You didn't have the expectation that in August of last year that the road would be somewhat smoother than it is now?
No,
not at all.
That's retrospective armchairing by
me. Okay, thank you. Deca College, what impact is this going to have? What ought it have?
That's an investment in a trade school that my private equity fund made. We invested in for-profit education. We had the largest medical school in the world, located down in the Caribbean, but granted more medical degrees to women and minorities than any other school in the world. And we had a lot of similar investments in blue-collar, post-secondary, and I think they did great work. The Decker thing in Kentucky brought disadvantaged people in the construction industry where the average wage is $18 an hour, and this is a life-changing experience for those folks. The feds decided to interrupt the eligibility of that institution for federal funding. The thing immediately went kapoof because that was 85% of the revenues. And there were a few people who'd been fired by the college who said, oh, this was a hotbed of fraud, but that has not panned out.
So it's not going to happen.
I regard it as an investment that went sour, and believe me when I tell you, I lost money on that deal.
So talking about education, let's go to schools.
Yes. What about, you're the governor, how do you address the campaign for fiscal equity case? What do you do? You're in office.
I know. The CFE suit, I'd like to sit everybody down at the table together, all the stakeholders, and I would include the teachers' unions as a stakeholder, and certainly the city government, and there's been some ambiguity as to what the state should pay for, what the city should pay for, and I'm not, unalterably opposed to smoothing out inequities in funding if they can be proved to exist. I do think it's important that the education dollars be spent as efficiently as possible. I have a still small voice inside me that says New York State is spending about $14,000 per kid on education, which is more than any other state. Is that really the source of the problems in New York City, or is it possible that there are organizational and administrative changes that could be made in, for example, union work rules, not to put too fine a point on it, that might have an impact on the bottom line? So I'd like to get everybody there, but I'm not one of those who says, let's defy the court order, which I believe my opponent in the primary has said.
Okay. Would you, in terms of your legal options as governor, would you appeal the current ruling, or,
Well, it's under appeal now.
Well, no, but
it depends what can be worked out. As I understand it, the intermediate appellate court said that what Pataki had done pretty close to satisfies constitutional muster. So it may be that the thing could be put to bed without going to the Court of Appeals. If so, That's probably a good thing. I mean, I think we don't want to go to the Court of Appeals for the sake of having a constitutional confrontation.
There's a lot of talk about property taxes, and of course in education, where outside of New York City, the property tax supports the schools. And you talk about taxes, but it seems to me the property tax structure, or the whole tax structure in the city, in the state, is so cockeyed. It's put together each time, moved a little bit, changed, tampered.
I think the villain.
Go on.
I think the real villain here is the overall level of state spending. And if you just got your arms around that, for example, had a provision such as Colorado has, where you spend no more than the previous year's revenues, and this year that would have produced a budget of $108 billion compared with $112 to $115 billion. Then you wouldn't have this constant upward pressure on tax rates. And Albany not only spends too much, but then it sends the bill down to the counties. And so what are you going to do? Of course the counties have a problem with property taxes, but it's coming from Albany in two respects. One, overspending at the state level, which creates a stone pressing down, and then they send these unfunded mandates down to the county. So I think it's not the county's fault. I think it's Albany's fault.
Now, would you support then a statewide initiative that would provide, as Colorado does, a mandated break on spending?
Yeah, no, that's
and would you fight for that as governor?
I have proposed, and it's going to require a constitutional convention. But that was my first speech I gave to the Suffolk-Nassau Chamber of Commerce last November. I said, let's have a taxpayer Bill of Rights, which would have this Colorado break on spending and would have a Massachusetts-style collar around the property tax, so it couldn't go up more than 2.5% a year. If a town wants a new police station, if a county wants an initiative, they can put it on the ballot and override this proposition.
But explain how that would affect New York City property tax.
Well, New York City has classifications that would be hugely complex, and you'd have to bust through the classifications in order to make this work. You'd also have to put the real estate tax and the school tax in the same pot
that does
and
come
apply
from
the
the state,
2.5%.
doesn't it? That is from the state that we have this separate thing.
Well, they're all subdivisions of the state.
Right.
So, no,
go ahead.
You have to have a constitutional provision saying that the real estate and school taxes couldn't go up more than 2.5% a year. In many other states, the police and fire side of the house, the so-called municipal side of the house, and the school side of the house have to fight for the same dollar. In New York, the schools are kind of off on their own, which is a separate topic.
Okay, you get elected. What are the two top items on your agenda? What does the first 100 days of a Weld administration look like policy-wise?
Probably getting control of spending is the number one, because I think that relates to taxes and it relates to jobs. My number one priority is job creation, so we're not losing the generation of 20 to 34-year-olds to other states. The reason there are not enough good jobs at good wages here is because the cost of doing business are too high.
What else? What else is there, though, to stimulate business other than removing the negatives? Are there positives? What are our comparative advantages? How does upstate north of Rockland?
Well, we've got great advantages. We have the financial and cultural capital of the world. We have a string of universities upstate that's like a pearl necklace. We've got, I think, the finest natural resources of any state in the country. I prefer our mountains to the Rockies, and we've got abundant water and,
and the
Finger
Berkshires,
Lakes.
I hope.
Yeah. The New York section of the Berkshires.
What part of the dysfunction in the state, when everybody talks about dysfunctional government, is the structure? I mean, the two state bodies, the legislative bodies, the leaders, the power of those leaders, and the governor. I mean, how do you do this?
And why would you want to confront Shelley Silver for the next 4 years?
It's my favorite part of the job.
No.
The two favorite parts of the job as governor were dealing with the legislature and dealing with the press.
See, he's a masochist.
And you know why man is the only animal that laughs? We're the only animal that has a legislature.
Oh.
No. But seriously, I went in right away to the Speaker of the House, who was a social liberal, fiscal liberal, didn't come from the same politics I did, and tugged my forelock and made the submissive gesture and said, let's have coffee and cookies once a week in your office, not my office. And I followed Mike Dukakis, and it had been wall-to-wall Democrats, and they well and truly had gridlock with wall-to-wall Democrats. So you can have it. And I was kind of a fresh face and didn't know all that much about the sacred cows, so I didn't talk about the sacred cows. I talked about, well, this is what seems to be the problem here. I've jotted down a few factual things, not polemical, factual things on this piece of paper. You see it a little differently? And by having a low ego, I think you can get people to approach things in a factual way and drain some of the emotion out of the situation. I think that's the way to get to yes in politics.
Primary. You're going to, on May 30th, 31st, you have the convention. You're going to get your 25%. You're going to be a candidate. I presume Faso's going to do the same, so you're going to have a primary. Why Bill Weld and not John Faso?
I think
in the
people
primary?
have to get a sense of the life experience of the candidates. And obviously, I'm a guy who you don't have to totally guess whether I will follow through on pledges to hold down spending and taxes, because I've already done it with a 3-to-1 Democratic legislature against me. You don't have to guess whether I'm going to focus with laser-like intensity on job creation, because I did. And we created this big master plan with 6 separate strategies for 6 regions of Massachusetts. In New York, it'd probably be 25 separate strategies. You know, in the Finger Lakes, it's going to be open space preservation, tourism promotion, wine, fruits. You know, in Rochester, it's going to be, there's a lot of high-end skill sets latent in the workforce there for people who used to work in those jobs. So you'd make the same kind of push for biotech that I did in Cambridge when I was head of Massachusetts. So you can sort of, you don't have to judge by the packaging. You've already experienced the product in my case.
Very nice. Legacy, last minute. Looking back on your first 4 years in office in 2010 and perhaps your second in 2014, what is the legacy of Bill Weld?
I'd like people to say Bill Weld is a guy who increased the size of the pie for everybody and made sure it got divided up fairly, and made sure that no individual or group of individuals ever got thrust in the corner. I think that's the essence of democracy, and I would make it my obligation and my duty to make sure that happened.
Very nice.
Well, thank you, Bill Weld.
Thank you very much.
Doug. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you
Thanks
very much. Thank
Okay.
you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.